So take a moment to read this particular question. So I'll give you a little bit of time, read through it, and see if you can understand what is being said. Okay, so it says, a list of areas in kilometers of the principal islands of the world are given below. Now, at the moment, even though this is a table, in some ways, this is just a list of data because it's an item with one value. And so this is a list of data. However, if we go to the question, it says, if intervals of 250,000 kilometers are used, in which interval will most of the islands fall? Okay, so this is where we're starting to group the data into intervals. And so I want you to take a moment and see if you can get, well, say guess, or can you see what do you think the correct answer is? Now, that's what I want you to do. So take a moment and look at the data and see if you can approximate or guess fairly quickly which answer do you think is correct. And then we're going to go through how we can know for sure. So just give me a quick, which of the 4 intervals or 5 intervals do you think is correct? Is it A? Is it B? Is it C? Is it D? Is it E? Okay, so I see Komotsile has guessed A. There we go. All right. Okay, lots of people are guessing A, so I'm quite curious to know what the real answer is. Okay. So I think most of you, what you did is you scanned through the data and you identified there's some really big ones, but most of the data items under 250, you can quickly see there's quite a few that are under 250. And so because quite a few of them are under 250, if you've got 5 in that first interval, then you can clearly see that the next one, okay, so there's a couple, there's one in 400, there's one in 500. So a good guess would be A. Now, we don't know this for sure at this stage. And so the reason we don't know is we haven't gone through all the data items in a detailed way. And so what I'm going to show you is how do we create, I suspect the answer is A, but we'll know in a moment. But what we're going to do is we're going to create a grouped data table to help us with this calculation and with future calculations. So what we normally do when we have a grouped data table is we have a interval. And in this particular question, the intervals are going to be in thousands. It's going to be 0 to 250. It's going to be 250 to 500, 500 to 750. So I'm just ticking off these ones here. 750 to 1,000 or a million. And then it leaves a big gap and it just has these. And so it's 2,000. Okay, so these are the intervals that they have given us in the question. Now, normally, if we are creating a grouped data table, if they haven't given us the table from scratch, the next column we'll do is something called a tally column. And then next to that, we would have frequency. So I'm going to show you how we would do the tally column. What I would do is I would start at the very top and I'd go, okay, do that one. Now, which one does that go into? It goes into this one. Okay, 789, which one does that go into? It goes into that one. 751 goes into that one. 587 goes into that interval. 507 also goes in that interval. 422 goes in that interval. 230 goes here. 229 goes there. 217 goes there, 196 goes there, and 178. Now, when we normally do as a tally, when we get to 5, we just draw a line like this. So if we now go and look at our tally marks for these intervals, we will get 5 fall into that interval, 1 falls in here, 2 falls into that interval, 2 falls into that interval, and 1 falls into that interval, the biggest one. The question was, if these intervals are used, in which interval will most of the items fall? I can clearly see the highest frequency interval is going to be 0 to 250, and so the correct answer is going to be A. Okay, awesome. So finding we would call this, the fancy term would be, we would call this the modal interval. And we'd call it the modal interval because it's the interval that occurs the most times. Okay, so that's a bit like the mode when we're dealing with lists of data. Now, the next question I want to ask you is, I want to change the question and I want to say, if I ask you, what is the median interval? Does anybody know, or does anybody want to suggest in the chat or raise their hand and say, how would you go about finding the median interval? Yeah, Kukle, let's come to you.
Hi, sir.
Hey.
So is the median interval the midpoint interval as well?
It's not. So this is a good question. The median interval, if you think back to what the median was with lists of data, it would normally be halfway through the data if it's arranged from smallest to biggest. Do you remember that?
Yes, sir.
So one of the challenges we have is we need to be able to count through the data from smallest to biggest. Kukle, have you heard of what's called a cumulative frequency column?
Yes, sir. Is that the median?
It's not the median, but it'll help me find the median.
Okay, yes, sir.
So what I'm going to suggest is I'm going to give it a moment.
I found it.
Okay, but let's give it a moment. I want you to help me fill out the cumulative frequency column. So if we think about the cumulative frequency column, in the first row, what are we going to have?
Is it 1, 2?
So how many items fall in the first interval? It'll be 5.
Oh yeah, 1, 2.
Because we're accumulating them.
Yes,
but then when we go to the second row, because we're accumulating, we're going, how many items occurred from the very beginning up to this interval? So what's this one going to be?
6.
6. Because I've got the 5 from the beginning plus the 1, which is 6. Okay, what's the next total
8.
for the, it's going to be 8. Okay.
Then it's 10.
Okay.
And then 11, sir.
11. All right.
Yes, sir.
This is awesome. Now, if we think back, so Kukle, thank you so much for your help. You've been super helpful. I'm going to take another student's help in this second bit. If we think of how we found the median before, wasn't the first step always to find the position of the median, right? Now, can someone tell me how that calculation would work here? What was the formula that we used to find the position of the median, or what we'll call Q2, the position? How did that calculation work? Yeah. Okay, Owami, let's go to you.
So wasn't the calculation half n plus 1? So
yes. Now, in this particular set of data, how many items do you think there are?
How many items?
Yeah, you can look at the table. The table will help you a little bit. So how many data items? So if you look at the frequency column or the cumulative frequency, it'll give you a bit of a hand there.
Are there 5, sir?
Okay, so there's not 5 data items. If you look at the frequency column, it goes, the first interval has 5, and then I have 1, and then I have 2. Or you can look at the total of the cumulative frequency column, and it counts all the items. And how many are there?
11, sir.
11, yes. So for the position of the median, we're just going to go half 11 plus 1. So now what we're going to have is what's the position of the median going to be in this data set?
6.
6. Yeah. So it's the 6th position in this data set. Now, in our data set, if you look at the cumulative frequency column, there are 5, we've used up 5 items in the first interval, but when we get to the second interval, we've used up 6 items. And wasn't the position of the median the 6th position?
It was.
And so we would say the median interval is going to be between 250 and 500,000 kilometers. So we use the calculation in a similar way, except we count how far into the data we are, and we use the cumulative frequency column.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Okay, fantastic. So this is what's called finding the median interval. Now, there is something else which we also need to talk about, which is the finding the mean, but I'm going to push that to later in the lesson. So all I've shown you so far is how to find the modal interval, which is the interval of the data that has the most items. And then finding the median interval, we used the position calculation that we learned about earlier, and we used what's called the cumulative frequency column to help us find how far we were into the data. We could have said, well, 5 plus 1 gives us 6, position 6, but I think the cumulative frequency column helps us even more. So,
Mr. Ace?
Yeah.
Sorry, there's a question from Lena Mile. If you could explain why we have to say 11 plus 1.
Okay, what I'm going to say is this is the position calculation for a median. So I would suggest watching the second video of the series. Also, you'll see us do it again and again. It's basically, if we want to find the median, the n plus 1 makes sure that we fall between 2 values. Is sort of a quick way of maybe explaining it. But for now, you just need to memorize the formula, to be honest. Okay, let's have a go at a question that looks similar to this. So here is a news story, and because it's grouped data, most of the time in exams, guys, we won't ask you to make your own group data table because it just takes too long, but I wanted to show you one example where we did it. Okay, so here is another story. Take a moment to read it, and then I'll read through it for you as well, and see if you can make sense of what's going on so far.
Mr. Ace?
Yeah?
I'm not sure if you understand Boyani's question maybe in the chat.
Yeah, I haven't seen it, sorry. So does it happen that the position you got is not in the cumulative frequency? It doesn't. So it'll always be somewhere on the chart. And Vuyani, what you'll see is in another example, when we do it now, you'll see that come up again. So the position can be between, like, it can be a half, but because we're choosing an interval, we just choose the interval that matches the closest to where we are. But you'll see that in the second example now. Okay, let's read through this. So it says, a choir teacher kept a record of the number of learners who attended 40 choir practices during the year. So there were 40 choir practices. The intervals are for number of learners at choir practice. And it says there was one occasion over the year where only between 0 and 10 people came to choir practice. Maybe it was like there was something fun happening outside. No one wanted to come to choir that day, whatever. Then there were 2 occasions in the year where between 10 and 20 people came to choir practice. There were 11 occasions of the year where between 20 and 30 students came to choir practice. Now, what you'll notice is that the total frequency has to be 40 because the number of choir practices is 40. And what you'll notice is we don't know, when we have grouped data, we don't know exactly how many students came. We give up some of that information in order to group the data. So in this first column, there could have been 7 students who came that day. There could have been 8. I don't really know. And I've given up that information because I've grouped my data. But there are other benefits to grouping your data. So what I want to ask you is, what is the modal interval for this data? What is the mode? What is the most common amount of people who came to choir practice? Over there. And put your answer in the chat. Kuchle, go for it. What's your question?
Oh, so I thought you wanted us to raise our hands for the answer.
Oh, okay. No. Just for now, I will come to you absolutely soon.
Okay, sir.
Okay. Who else? I think Vianney's put an answer. Who else has an answer? Which of these, if you look at these intervals, the modal interval, the mode means the one that occurs the most often. So what is the modal interval for this group data? If you pop it in the chat, that would be awesome. I want to see what you guys are getting. Okay, so the modal interval has to be the one which occurs the most often. So which has the highest frequency? In this case, it looks to me like the highest frequency would be here. So there are 14 occasions where between 40 and 50 students. So the modal interval will be between 40 and 50. Okay. So in some ways, group data is almost even easier than list data because it's just requiring you to read a little bit. But once you understand what's going on, it's quite straightforward. I want to modify the question now. I want you to tell me what is the median interval for this data set. And what I want to encourage you to do is think about if an extra column for cumulative frequency could be helpful. Or you don't have to have an extra column. You could just count how far into the data you are, but I want you to try and work out what is the median interval for this data set. I'll give you some time for that now. So think about when you find the median, you always have to do a little bit of a calculation. And think about where that will assist you. So I'm going to suggest that this so the median interval is in the position 20.5. And so you have to ask yourself, this data is already arranged from smallest to biggest. Which interval is around 20.5? So you could count it by the frequencies and go, okay, well, there's one in that thing. Then if I add 2 more, I get 3. If I add 11 more, I get 14. But I'm going to just add a column for cumulative frequency. It's just easier for my brain. So let's see what I do here. 14. What have I got here? I've got 6. I've got 23. And then over here, I've got 37. Here, I've got 40. Okay, so if you think about where my 20.5 is going to fall, it is going to fall. Let's have a look. So it's 14, then to 23. So it's going to have to be in this column over here. So actually, in some ways, maybe the cumulative frequency can be a little bit distracting because this is at the end. So it probably is better to count, like counting 1 to 2 is 3, 11 is 14, And then when I add 9, I've gone past the 20.5. And so we know that the median interval will be over here, 30 to 40. Okay. Are there any questions or comments, guys? Because I know it's which way do you prefer to do it? Do you prefer to just count the frequency and see when you get to the number? Or do you prefer to have a cumulative frequency column to help you? I'd be interested to know in the chat which one you prefer. Are there any questions or comments? Okay, so William said he thinks the cumulative frequency helps. Okay, yeah, and you'll see that later in this section, the cumulative frequency column comes up quite a lot anyway, so it's good to have it there anyway. Oh, Nawazi also thinks it helps. Okay, so I'll keep the cumulative frequency in there for you. Awesome. Okay, let's do something. Now we've done the median, we've done the modal interval. Oh, okay, so clearly you guys are big, you are big fans of cumulative frequency column. I am too, so that's awesome. Let's now look at something a little bit different. Let's look at what's called the estimated or approximate mean. So there's 3 measures of where the middle of the data is. There's the modal interval, there's the median interval, and then there's also what's called the estimated mean. Now, does anybody know why it would be called the estimated? Why is it not the exact mean when we deal with grouped data? Does anybody have an idea why it's no longer called the mean, it's called the estimated mean when we deal with grouped data? Yes, Kuchle, let's come to you.
So because it's not like the exact number. So in order to get the estimated mean, you'd have to get the midpoint first and then the cumulative frequency. But when you get the midpoint, you have to add. And
okay, we'll get there in a moment, but I agree with you. I like what you were saying about the estimate, saying we don't know the exact value.
Yeah.
I also want to ask Colette. Colette, what did you agree with Kuchle, or did you have something similar or something different to say? I see your hand is up. You just unmute yourself. Hi, Colette. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So what did you think? Did you, when you think about the estimated mean, do you agree with what Kuchle is saying? It's estimated because you don't have the exact value.
No.
Right. I think I've maybe lost you there, Colette. But let's go with what was being said there. Basically, you know that you don't know exactly how many learners are at choir practice. You do know that there's between 0 and 10. And what we do to calculate the estimated mean, guys, there's 2 ways of doing it. One is doing it manually, one is with a calculator. I'm going to show you the manual method, but what you need to do is you need the midpoint. And the midpoint of the interval basically acts like the value that we don't know. So what is the midpoint between 0 and 10? What is the midpoint between 0 and 10? I'm going to add an extra column here. Oh, my hands are being a bit wobbly here. Put it in the chat. It's going to be 5. Yeah, piece of cake, right? So 5. Then the midpoint between 10 and 20 is going to be 15. Between 20 and 30 is going to be 25. Then it's going to be 35, 45, 55. Okay, so if we want to calculate the mean, what we need to do then is with the mean, we always have we add up all items, and then we divide by the number of items. Now, in our data set, we know that we have 40 because that's the total of the frequency. So it's going to be divided by 40. But what's more difficult is how do we add up all the items? And all we need to do is we take the midpoint and we times it by the frequency for each interval. So we take 5, and because there's only 1 item in that column, we go 5 times 1. And then we go plus, now it's no longer going to be 5, the value that we use for the second interval is 15. How many items are there in the second interval? There's going to be 2. So we go 15 times 2. So we've dealt with the first 2. Then we go plus 25 times 11. Now, what I want is I want you guys to work out for me the estimated mean. Can you work that out for me? Work out the estimated mean, and then we'll check that, and then we'll take a little break after we've done that. How do you find the midpoint? Lusanda, what you do is you basically just add the 2 endpoints and divide by 2. That would be a good way of doing it. So but halfway between 0 and 10. And then halfway between 10 and 20. So you add 10 and 20 and you divide by 2 and you get 15. Okay, so I hope that helps. Okay, so you don't divide 40 by 5. No, you don't. So if you want the estimated mean, you add up all the items and then divide by the number of items. So I want everyone to try and calculate that now. And we're doing it manually. See what you get. So if we carried on with this thinking, we would say, so 35 was the midpoint of the next one times 9 plus 45 times by 14. I'm like running out of space here. Plus 55 times 3. And so that would give us the estimated mean using basically what we're doing is we're saying the midpoint acts as the value, and then we just say how many values did they occur. I've got my answer here. We can have a quick look. So the final total of all the top bits is 1420, and then we divide by 40, and the answer should be 35.5. So you should get an answer of 35.5. Now, if you want, you can add another column for the multiplication, but I think that just takes too long. Okay, so let's have a quick look at the answer here. If you look at the answer, what we did here, I mean, all that you really need to do is this calculation that I've showed you. So you have, sorry, I think it's been wonky. You basically have, you add up all the items, and how do you add up all the items? You simply find the midpoint and you times it by the frequency. And then you add midpoint times the frequency, and so on. Now, there is another way of doing this, which I can show you. I'll show you at the beginning of the next lesson, actually. For today, I want to practice on just the manual way of doing it. Okay, Vianney, where did I lose you, Vianney? Let's have a look. Okay. So I will show you the calculator thing. I just think it'll be better if I do it at the beginning of the lesson. But for now, I want you to also know the manual calculation. Okay, what we need, guys, is a brain break. Before we go to that, all we've looked at so far today is the modal interval, the median interval, and now the estimated mean. And those are the 3 things that we're really going to just do today. Okay, could I get you on your feet, please? And then if you could help me level in identifying the students who are stretching the most. Guys, stand up and just reward your body with a bit of a stretch.
Come on, guys. Don't be camera shy.
You can smile with us.
Stretch.
There we go. Give it a stretch. There we go. Oh, look at those happy faces.
Shout out to William.
Good. Sanda, Nolwazi.
Nolwazi.
Nolwazi's always got a nice smile on his face.
Yeah, she does.
A very happy face. All right. It is lovely to see you guys. Wow. I don't know, there's something about seeing other people out there that is just, humans are just made for that, I guess. Okay, so do your favorite stretch. And
Shout out to Precious.
there we
Yes,
go.
guys. Loving this energy.
Oh, I can feeling great. Then let us look at our brain break for today. So people from this many countries have visited the space station. And so you were given these various things, and ultimately the number that you're trying to find is this one here. What do you think it is? Hmm. So 18 countries have visited the space station is what people are saying. Let's see if I agree. So I definitely think this is 3, and that's 3, and that's 3. And this would be 2 and 2. So that's 2. So that means that is 12. 12 plus 3 and 3 is 18. And so 18 countries have visited the space station. Yeah, and I
Nice
think there was
work,
actually a South African guy,
guys.
Mark Shuttleworth. I think he went to go visit. Remember Mark Shuttleworth? I don't know, maybe before your everyone's
Yes.
time, but yeah. Well done, guys. That was
Good job.
looking good. Cool. Awesome. Okay. Well, that was our brain break. And I encourage you, if you haven't had a stretch, just have one more stretch before we get going for the next part of the lesson. You really want to make sure your body is kind of just, yeah, it's had a little bit of a rest. And then let's go back to some similar questions. Okay, so let's look at a very similar question. And whenever you get group data questions, they can look a little bit scary at first because the data, but actually in some ways they're easier. So in a particular primary school in Pietermaritzburg, it was found that 90 of the foundation learners were accompanied by someone to school by someone. The ages of the person accompanying the child were recorded, as shown in the table below. Okay, so the person who is accompanying, there are 12 people who were between 0 and 10 years of age who were accompanying. Now, the total that I'm actually going to write down, did I see 90? Let's look. 90. So I would imagine if 90 is the total, at the bottom here, if we added up all the frequencies, we should get a total of 90. Okay, so first question. Using the information in the table above, what is the modal interval for the data set? What is the modal interval for the data set? Remember, this data is grouped now. Okay, the modal interval is a little bit, it's like, straightforward. So which is the interval with the most people in it? It's 30. So, well, it's the one with the frequency of 30. So the modal interval will be 10 to 20 ages in years. That's the interval that we were dealing with. Okay, so step 1, 10 to 20. Perfect. Now I want you to find the estimated mean age of the person accompanying a learner from the foundation phase. So all they're basically saying is, find me the estimated mean. So from earlier on, what we know is there was a top bit and a bottom bit. I want to ask you guys, what is the value of the bottom part of this calculation? So when I calculate the estimated mean, the bottom part is going to be simpler than the top. What's the bottom part going to be? Okay, it's clearly going to be 90 because there are 90 people involved in this calculation. However, doing the top part is a little bit trickier, but I want to give you some time to do it. The only tip I'm going to give you is I'm going to say it's a really good idea to add an extra column for a midpoint. So I want you to try and work out the estimated mean for this data table. And all I'm going to say is having a midpoint column will be very helpful. And off you go. And then if you have a question, you can raise your hand or you can make a comment in the chat and I will try and help you. Yeah, Lasanda, what's your question? Yeah, let's go to you. Hi,
Hello,
Lasanda.
sir.
How's it going?
Hi, I'm good, and you, sir?
Very good.
So I wanted to know, in class, I was taught that when you are looking for the cumulative frequency, always the last value, it must be equal to the total frequency. But must I always come it up like that?
It will be, but you won't always need the cumulative frequency column, right? So it depends what they're asking for. In this particular case, because we're dealing with the estimated mean, we probably won't need a cumulative frequency column. We only need that possibly for the median. Does that help a little bit, Lasanda?
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yeah. Okay, so what I'm doing is basically I'm going to have in my top line, I should have 5 times 12 plus 15 times 30. And you'll see I'm just working through each of these columns. I won't keep on using the same color if it's too difficult. Plus 35. Wait. So you're basically following this pattern, 25 times 18 plus and so on. And so if you carry on doing that, let's just have a quick check. I'm going to use my sneaky superpowers to check what the total is. We should be getting, as our top number over here, 2,310. So 2,310 divided by 90. 10 divided by 90, and you'll get 25.66 or 25.67 if you round off, and depending on how many number places you round off to, you would just follow that. So the estimated mean is going to be 25.67. Now, were you guys able to do that? Are there any questions or comments about that? Okay, if you are comfortable, then I would like you to then move on to question C, which is finding the median age, or I'm going to call this the median interval of the person accompanying the learner. So the median. And I want you to think back to what do we need to help us with the median? We always calculate the position. And then when we calculate the position, what do we need to do to help us track which interval it's in? So over to you guys. Can you find the median age of the person accompanying the learner? And we're looking at the table. So position of the median. So this would be a half. Okay, so a couple of people, so I'm getting it's in position 45.5. So now you have to decide, how do you figure out what interval goes with position 45.5? Be careful with this one. So think about it. If it's in position 45.5, which interval would it fall into? There's 12 in this one over here. Well, let me use a different color. So there's 12 students who are in that age group. This is already a range from smallest to biggest. So there's 30 in this one. So in total, how many students have we had so far? We've had 42. And so it might be helpful to have a cumulative frequency column here. Now, if you have that, you'll see that by the end of that row, we had 42. And then after 42, what's the next row that's going to be in line? Well, we're going to go all the way up to 60, but then we've basically got to the level that has our median in. So take a moment to think about that. It's in position 45.5. Which interval is in line with the 45th position? It can't be the first one because we've only got 12 items through the data. It can't be the second one because we've only gone 42 items through the data. So the median interval is going to occur in the third row because we go all the way up to the 60th position. So the correct answer that I can see for the median interval is going to be 20 to 30. Okay, so as we think about today, we can see there's different techniques that we use for calculating different central measures. The modal interval is actually quite easy. It's just the one that occurs the most often. If you have to set up a table, maybe it takes a bit of time, but really not hard. The estimated mean probably requires the most work. But again, it's not tricky, but you need to know about the midpoint column. The midpoint column helps you with the estimated mean. And then for the median, we always calculate the position of the median. And it seems that from what I've seen today, you guys find the cumulative frequency column quite helpful for finding the median. And so that's where I want to leave it from today. There is a little bit of time. And so, Lebo, if you can put the link to the poll out, but if there are any additional questions from today, we have a bit of time, so I can take more questions. Are there any questions from the class around these three measures of this? Okay, otherwise, then we can just fill in the poll. Olwetu, let's go to you. What is your question, Olwetu?
Sir, I have a question.
Okay.
So in the median what, why are we not using 42? Are we not using 42
Okay.
but we use 60?
If you think about the position, can you see that the position of the median is above 42?
Yes, sir.
It's 45.5. Can you see that? Like
Yes,
from my
sir.
position? So what it means is, if I had to go to 42, you're right, if the 42nd position would still be in the second row, but because I have to go into the 45th position, I have to leave the second row and go into the third row. Does that make a bit of sense? Like, so 12 were in between 0 and 10. If I add 30 to the next row, I'm up to 42 places into the data, but I need to be into position 45.5 or whatever interval has 45. And so I have to leave the second interval and go to the third one, which is the one that is in line with this.
So isn't 42 the closest to 45.5?
No, but it's not about being closest, it's about which one does it fall into. And so because you're in the 45th, like if the position had been like 35, then you would have been in the second interval. But because 35 would be like it's still inside the interval, the second one. But because it's 45, it's left the second interval and gone into the third one.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Okay, cool. All right, guys. So we will continue with this in our next lesson on Wednesday. So we're not finished with this at all. We need to work through it slowly. But I do hope today you got that we can calculate measures of where the middle of the data is if the data is grouped. Okay, that was my main intention for today.